As you might be aware, there's a lot of information out there for golfers these days, and sometimes we get a bit confused with too many voices talking to us. Well, here is my top 10 tips for any beginning golfer. What are the things that I should be aware of in detail, broken down into a list of the top 10. The first one that I would like you to focus on is taking dead aim at your intended target. I see an awful lot of golfers having lessons and on the golf course trying to improve their game, not aiming where they want the golf ball to go. We've got to understand that golf is an aiming sport. So we're aiming to get the ball to a target. So of course we should be aiming in the right direction, or we should be aiming very consistently in our sort of intended direction. If you have a little bit of a fade or a little bit of a draw, you might allow for that in your setup, but you have to be consistent. I see so many golfers that one shot they'll aim over this way, the next shot they'll aim over this way, and then wonder why the golf ball has gone offline. The simplest way to always check your alignment is set up to the golf ball, pick out an intended target, take the club you're using, drop it onto your toe line, make sure it's level with the front of your toes, and then just walk back and have a look. And even experienced golfers will often be amazed at how far off this is from where they think they were aiming. So we always want to make sure we're aiming correctly. And that's with every club in the bag, be it driver all the way down to putter, take dead aim. The next thing I'd like you to focus on is making a solid stance. We see a lot of golfers address the golf ball, maybe they're aiming in the right direction now, and then they stand like this, really sort of narrow together with their feet, maybe a bit like this with their feet as well. And then their swing happens and their legs are all over the place. Golf is a power sport. We've got to have that nice powerful base. So what I'd like you to do for this is measure the width of your shoulders. So take a golf shaft, measure from one shoulder to another and just nip the club at the intended position. Then take that down and drop that down, and that should be the instep of your feet. So that's now the width of my stance is wider than the outside of my shoulders. That means I've now got a pyramid base, a wider bottom and a narrower top. From here I can make a turn and stay stable. If my stance gets too narrow, as soon as I move, I start to get out of position here and I lose my balance a little bit with my knees wobbling around. So for all of your full swings, particularly your longer swings with driver, we'd like to have that wider stance. The next part of the setup process I'd like you to learn in this 10 top tips for beginners would be to get better posture. So to stand to the golf ball like you mean business. We see a lot of golfers who lose their posture early on in their swing because it wasn't great to start with. So this for me is good posture. It's lightly flexed knees, it's a straight back, a chin and chest up, and my hands and arms are nicely relaxed. Try and avoid tucking your hips or rolling your spine. This is kind of classic poor posture. Looks like you're carrying 2 heavy bags of shopping, and we want to avoid that. So good posture in your setup would be perfect. The next area to focus on, and you can do this in a bit more detail in other videos, would be making sure you've got a correct grip. So key points for the grip is I'd like to see that lead hand not too high on the top of the club. We see a few people hanging right off the top here and always losing connection to the club. So a little bit lower down with the lead hand, 2 to 2.5 knuckles visible, and then drop the bottom hand in nice and close. Now you've got 3 options here. You can be a baseball grip, you can be an interlinking grip, or you can be an overlapping grip. I don't really have a massive preference. I'd rather the second 2, either interlinking or overlapping would be my ideal, but baseball, as long as your hands are close together, is okay. What we want to avoid as golfers is splitting the hands up. This makes the hands work as 2 independent units, and that's not really what we'd want. So interlinking or overlapping preferred, baseball can be. Try and keep your grip pressure quite relaxed, so not too tight when you're holding onto the club, so keep that nice and soft. The next point that I'd like you to focus on as we start making the swing is using your hips quite a lot, particularly in the downswing. We see too many golfers who swing the club to the top and then hang back and fire off the back foot. All the body weight stays here and the lead leg lifts and is light. We want to go the opposite way in a golf swing, so we go to the top of the swing, nice turn, and then we shift into that lead side and then we turn through. So it's going to be classed as a lateral rotation. The hips move laterally before they rotate. If you get to the top of the backswing and rotate, sometimes you'll get stuck on your back leg. So it's a lateral rotation on the way through. So as a beginning golfer, one of my top 10 tips would be make sure your hips lead your downswing. Right, now moving on to the way you might practice. What I'd like you to focus on when you're practicing is making each range session and each ball within each range session really count. Make it really valuable. Don't come to the driving range, dump a bucket of 100 balls down there and just smash, smash, smash. We want to make each ball really relevant, really count. Now, if you've developed a pre-shot routine, which I would encourage you to do, use that pre-shot routine when you come to the driving range. So that might be to set the club down, check your alignment, have a little practice backswing to make sure you're in the right position before every shot. If that's what you're going to do on the golf course, that's what you should be doing when you're at the driving range as well. Make each practice session and make each practice ball count. Now this next tip, tip number 7, this is more about what you should be doing when you're actually playing golf. And as a beginning golfer, it's often the thought that we want to pick the biggest club in the bag and we want to hit that ball as far as possible. And that's a lovely idea, but understand the bigger clubs are more difficult. The more lofted clubs, the shorter clubs, are often more easy to use and easier to get the ball, particularly if it's in a bad lie. So my overriding principle here is loft, angle on the face, loft is your friend. The more loft you have, the better you will be in a certain number of situations. So more loft off the tee is generally straighter than less loft. So a 3-wood is straighter than a driver. If you find yourself in the rough, more loft helps you get the ball out of the bad lie or the bunker or wherever you are. So let's use plenty of loft. And going into that tip 8, leave the driver in the bag. Now it stands to reason that a lot of golfers walk out onto the golf course, as soon as they see par 4 written on the tee box, they just pull out the driver and then they look down there and then they go, ooh, doesn't look particularly nice down there, does it? It's narrow, there's a bunker, there's a water hazard, there's out of bounds. But I've got my driver in my hand because it's a par 4, I have to hit driver. Well, no, you don't have to hit driver. You can use anything you like off that tee, and you probably should avoid using driver unless you're very confident, very competent at keeping the driver in play. Use a 3-wood, use a 5-wood, use a hybrid club, even use a 7-iron. Just get that ball in play without smashing driver on every hole and knocking it out of bounds. Now, tip number 9, this is one of my favourite tips to make golf fun, enjoyable and practice your short game, is go and play par 3 courses. Most of you might have started your golfing journey on a par 3 course, classically a pitch and putt or something like that. But go back and play par 3 courses regularly because they really are good at keeping the game fun, taking the pressure off hitting driver and helping you work on that short game, that touch and that feel around the green. So make sure you spend plenty of time on par 3 courses, maybe late evening, you've got an hour and you think, I'll just go and nip round a few holes, go and use the 9-hole golf course. Focus on getting the ball up and down when you can if you have missed greens, and it really will help and benefit you when you next go and play the longer golf courses. And the last tip really here is to understand that the previous 9 tips are great tips even for existing and experienced golfers. So tip number 10 is go and review this video quite regularly. Don't think just because you've been playing for a year that you no longer have to think about your alignment or you no longer have to think about your grip. I've seen more bad grips and more bad alignment on experienced golfers than anybody else because they almost take it for granted. They almost think, oh, it's a fundamental, it's a basic, I learned that a year ago, I don't need to focus on it. Well, of course you do, and it's more important as a good player that you check over those fundamentals, that you make sure your game is constantly improving, because any problem with alignment or grip or swing technique will manifest itself in other swing faults, other compensation for something else you've done wrong. So review these previous 9 tips, and that's my final tip in the top 10 tips for beginner, is make sure you watch this video once a month and keep improving your game.